She stood outside the military base gates clutching a faded photograph. A young Japanese woman, no more than 24, wearing her best kimono despite the frayed edges. In her hand, a letter written in careful English she had practiced for weeks. Around her, dozens of other women waited in similar silence, each holding their own letters, their own photographs, their own desperate hopes. The year was 1946. Japan lay in ruins, and these women were about to learn that love would not be enough. The guard at the gate barely looked up as she approached. She extended the letter with both hands, bowing slightly, her voice trembling as she spoke the English words she had memorized. "Please, I wish to marry Corporal James Miller," he promised. The guard's face remained neutral. He had seen this same scene play out 50 times that week alone. Without reading the letter, he pointed to a sign newly posted on the fence. It was written in both English and Japanese. Fraternization between U.S. military personnel and Japanese nationals is strictly prohibited. Marriage requests will not be processed. Her hands dropped. The letter fluttered in the wind, but she couldn't move to catch it. Behind her, the other women shifted uncomfortably, their worst fears materializing before their eyes. This wasn't supposed to happen. The soldiers had been kind. Some had been more than kind. Promises had been whispered in the darkness of bombed-out buildings, in quiet corners of dance halls that had sprung up to entertain the occupying forces. "When the war is over," they had said. "When I can bring you home." But the war was over now, and home, it seemed, did not include them. Inside the base, Corporal James Miller sat in the mess hall, staring at his uneaten breakfast. He knew she was out there. He had seen her through the fence yesterday, and the day before that. 3 months ago, he had meant every word he said to her. 3 months ago, he had believed he could navigate the military bureaucracy, fill out the right forms, and bring her back to Ohio as his wife. 3 months ago, he hadn't understood what non-fraternization policy truly meant. His commanding officer had made it brutally clear during last week's briefing. Any soldier found in violation of General Order No. 1 will face court-martial. That means no dating, no marriage proposals, no relationships of any kind with Japanese civilians. We are occupiers, not neighbors. Maintain discipline. Maintain distance. The room had fallen silent. Miller wasn't the only one with a Japanese girlfriend. He wasn't even the only one who had made promises he now couldn't keep. The policy had been enacted swiftly after surrender. At first, it seemed like temporary wartime caution. Then it became permanent doctrine. The reasoning was laid out in official memos that circulated through command. Fraternization would compromise military discipline, create security risks, and complicate the occupation. But everyone knew the unspoken reasons ran deeper. Post-war America was not ready to welcome Japanese brides. Not after Pearl Harbor. Not after years of propaganda depicting Japanese people as subhuman enemies. Miller had tried everything. He submitted a formal request for permission to marry. It was denied within 48 hours without explanation. He wrote to his congressman. The reply was polite but firm. Military regulations superseded personal wishes during occupation. He even considered going AWOL, running away with her before his unit shipped home. But where would they go? She had no passport. He would be arrested the moment he tried to board a ship with her. So he did what hundreds of other American soldiers were doing in bases across Japan. He stopped going to the places where he might see her. He ignored the letters that arrived through intermediaries. He hardened his heart and told himself it was for the best. What kind of life could she have had in America anyway? His family would never accept her. His town had just erected a war memorial with the names of boys killed in the Pacific. How could he bring home a Japanese wife to that? But late at night, lying in his bunk, he could still see her face. The way she had smiled when he taught her to dance. The way she had carefully prepared rice balls for him, apologizing that she had no better food to offer. The way she had said his name, Jimu, with an accent that made it sound like a different word entirely, something softer than James had ever been. Outside the gate, the woman finally bent to retrieve her letter from the dirt. The other women began to disperse, their shoulders slumped in defeat. Some cried quietly. Others walked away with their faces carefully blank, refusing to show emotion in public. One older woman remained, staring at the sign as if willing it to change through sheer force of will. A Japanese interpreter, hired by the base to handle civilian matters, approached the gate from inside. She was in her 40s, educated in America before the war, now serving as a bridge between two worlds that refused to meet. She had been translating rejection after rejection for weeks. She spoke gently through the fence. "You should not come back here. The answer will not change." The young woman looked up, her eyes red but her voice steady. "He said he loved me." The interpreter's expression softened with something close to pain. "Many soldiers said many things. The war changes what is possible. But the war is over." "No," the interpreter said quietly. "For you and him, the war will never be over." The woman understood then. It wasn't just policy. It wasn't just bureaucracy. It was something deeper, something that couldn't be fought with letters or tears or even love. She was Japanese. He was American. And between them stood not just a fence, but the weight of bombs and battles and blood that could never be washed away by promises made in the dark. She bowed once to the interpreter, folded her letter carefully, and walked away. She would not return to the gate. There was no point, but she would keep the letter and the photograph and the memories of a man who had made her believe that peace meant forgiveness, that the end of war meant the beginning of something new. She had been wrong. Peace, she was learning, was just another word for separation. Across Japan, this scene repeated itself hundreds of times every day. Women who had fallen in love with enemy soldiers now discovered that love was not enough to cross the chasm between victor and defeated. The non-fraternization policy was absolute. No exceptions were made. Not for love, not for pregnancy, not even for children born of these forbidden relationships. Inside the bases, American soldiers wrestled with guilt and relief in equal measure. They had wanted to be heroes. They had wanted to show mercy to a defeated people. Some had genuinely fallen in love. But the machinery of military discipline was stronger than individual conscience. Orders were orders. Rules were rules. And the rule was clear: no Japanese brides. What these women didn't know was that the policy would eventually change. In 1947, under pressure from soldiers and humanitarian groups, the U.S. military would begin allowing marriages. By 1952, more than 40,000 Japanese women would immigrate to America as military brides, facing discrimination and hardship but building lives nonetheless. But for the women waiting at the gates in 1946, that future was invisible. All they could see was rejection. The young woman walked through the ruins of Tokyo as evening fell. Around her, the city struggled to rebuild. Makeshift markets sold salvaged goods. Children played in the rubble. Life continued because it had no choice. She thought about the English words she had learned, the dreams she had constructed, the future she had imagined in a place called Ohio that she would never see. She thought about the moment she had believed that one American soldier's kindness meant the war was truly over. She had been wrong about many things, but she had not been wrong about one. Corporal James Miller had loved her. In his way, within his limitations, he had meant what he said. The tragedy was not that he had lied. The tragedy was that his love was not strong enough to break through the rules that men in distant offices had written. No individual love ever was. That night, she placed the letter and photograph in a small box with other remnants of a life that might have been. She did not burn them. She did not tear them up. She simply put them away, the way one puts away any other casualty of war. And in a barracks across the city, Corporal James Miller did the same, tucking her letters into his duffel bag where they would travel back to America with him, unread but never quite forgotten. The war had ended. But for thousands of couples divided by policy and prejudice, peace had brought only a different kind of loss. The gates remained closed. The promises remained broken. And the women who had dared to love across enemy lines learned that some boundaries cannot be crossed, no matter how much the heart insists otherwise. The rejections were not acts of individual cruelty. They were the systematic enforcement of a military policy designed to maintain order during occupation. But to the women standing outside the gates, the distinction meant nothing. Rejection was rejection. Loss was loss. And the heartbreak of a love forbidden by regulation felt no different than any other heartbreak, except perhaps that it came with the added burden of shame. She had begged. They had all begged in their own ways, with letters, with tears, with carefully practiced English phrases. And they had all been turned away, not because they were unworthy, not because the soldiers didn't care, but because the machinery of war does not stop simply because the shooting ends. It continues in policies and procedures, in regulations and restrictions, in the quiet violence of bureaucracy that breaks hearts without firing a single shot. And so the women walked away from the gates, back into a Japan that had lost everything, carrying with them one more loss to add to all the others. The Americans went home. The bases remained. And the promises made in the ruins of war dissolved like smoke, leaving nothing behind but faded photographs and letters that would never be answered.